The next thing that we should stop doing, that we are doing, is repeal the Civil Rights Act, I think. As Ed McMahon used to say to Johnny Carson, why should we repeal the Civil Rights Act? Well, there are a lot of obvious reasons. One obvious reason is that people have a right to associate with whom they please. This, as Jared Taylor said, this simple truth seems to have gotten lost. But why is sort of misinformation about race, how does that get mixed into this? What happened to this idea that people should have a right to associate with whom they please? Well, I think what goes on in people's minds is something like this, and it gets increasingly subtle. One, it's felt that by not hiring and associating with blacks, whites will be harming blacks. Everybody says this. Why do they say this? I don't think it's just simple confusion. Because, I mean, after all, if someone comes to me for a job and I say to him, you can't have it, he's not worse off than he was. So how on earth can that be conceived as harm? If I'm eating a ham sandwich and you ask me, can I have, this I guess would be gustatory affirmative action, can I have half your ham sandwich? And I say no, he's not hungrier than he was. So what's going on? I think what's going on is that people intuitively sense that unless whites give blacks access to the world whites have created, the technology, the education, the living quarters, blacks will not be able to create them for themselves. And so by denying association with blacks, people are in effect preventing them from getting these things. That's a big driving force behind the Civil Rights Act. Secondly, it has been assumed for a long time that the only reason that people don't want to associate with blacks are entirely irrational and vicious motives. You talk to people and they'll say, well, yes, you've got a right to association, but why wouldn't anybody want his children to go to school with blacks? Isn't it just race hatred, completely irrational animosity? And the fact is, if you say yes, that's a very thin reed on which to support the right of free association. It's very difficult, pragmatically, to defend a right whose only use is in pursuit of completely irrational ends. It's like sort of the right to suicide. A lot of people will say, oh, sure, we should have a right to suicide, but it's such a bad thing to do and so socially destructive that it's okay to prevent it anyway. I think one of the most important things that an educational campaign can do, and is sort of beginning to become apparent anyway, is that there are good rational reasons to wish to avoid blacks. That if you are an employer, race is a reasonable, not perfect, but valuable, informative proxy for various job-related traits like punctuality, ability, and so on. That if you're thinking of sending your children to a school with a certain proportion of blacks, and you don't want to, it's not out of a completely irrational desire to avoid people just because of their skin color. And this is the way the debate is represented, as if it's skin color that people wish to avoid. But to say no, because once statistically a certain black proportion is reached, interpersonal violence goes up, violence against teachers goes up, learning comes to an end. Race is not a perfect predictor, but it's a good one. And so it's reasonable to wish to act on my right of free association. Once we can cut through this error of thinking, there are no reasons to want to act on it, then the logjam will begin to clear.